Justin Vacula here, reporting at the Pennsylvania Counseling Association Conference. I'm here with
Travis Schermer.
And your presentation here, Male Same-Sex Friendships, Social Barriers and Wellness Benefits. So could you tell the audience about the presentation today?
Yeah, my hope today with the presentation was to have a discussion around some of the socially constructed norms within masculinity and how those may promote or inhibit the development of friendships and the connection between friendships and overall mental, physical, spiritual, emotional wellness. So in essence, how are men able to make friendships and how are they able to maintain them, and if they're not able to maintain them, what are the effects of that?
What are some particular issues that men face in the domain of friendships?
Well, there are a number. I guess starting with early adolescence, males start to distance themselves from their same-sex peers. And it's not necessarily something that they're doing intentionally. As men grow or boys grow into some of these socially constructed norms around masculinity, about independence, about success, and success oftentimes meaning success or conquering over another person, so too do they start to distance themselves from those relationships. While their early relationships in childhood might have been very intimate, using loving, caring words, that if you hear a male child talk about a friend, it might almost sound like he's talking about an intimate partner, almost like a romantic relationship. But as they age, as those norms become more prevalent, males distance themselves from those connections.
So what can be some of the effects of distancing from those connections?
A sense of isolation, I think most importantly. A sense of longingness for those more intimate connections that were maybe present when they were younger. That in late adolescence, young adulthood, and really throughout the adult lifespan, it's not uncommon for males to miss and long for that closeness that they had in those relationships. And men will typically try to find that or replicate it somewhere else, typically in a romantic relationship, but always longing for that type of connection with another man.
You mentioned historically that men's friendships were valued, particularly in literature, but now they've taken more of a backseat.
Yeah, and I think it's reflected as it was, in the conversation today around the table. There was a discussion about current depictions on television, and how males or fathers are depicted as being silly or stupid, inconsequential, and they always seem like kind of bumbling fools. But men, in particular men's friendships, were depicted very positively up until the turn of the 20th century, at which time there was a shift. There was a lot of emphasis on camaraderie, of overcoming obstacles together, about having a pure kind of friendship and connection that women were unable to have. And I don't think that women are unable to have those types of connections. It's just that valuing of men's same-sex friendships has really shifted over the course of the past century or so.
Another thing in the session that came up were some negative ideas about masculinity. What are some of those ideas?
Some negative ideas about masculinity, I think, as it relates to friendship in particular, can be around that men's friendships are less than in some way. And I know there was a New York Times piece last fall talking about men's friendships, and it was very damning. Is it okay to say damning? Oh. Sorry. It was very damning of men's friendships, that it depicted them as being, or this author, and I feel remiss that I don't remember who they were, was suggesting that men's friendships, being that they were not intimate in the same way that women's same-sex friendships were, that they were less than in some way. And I think that that's not only maybe a mischaracterization of men's friendships, but also that it's harmful because men may relate in different ways. And I think that this expectation that all men are going to relate in a particular way, or that there's a particular right way to have a friendship is erroneous. And in turn, the positive impacts that friendships have in general are numerous. But I think that those types of setting men's friendships as a step down or a less than position are really harmful, as well as I think some of these stereotypes about men as being unemotional or being disconnected, that men do long for connection. Men do have connection in their lives. It just sometimes takes a different form. But it's nevertheless very helpful and hopeful and growthful relationships that they develop.
Here in the handout, you talk about homophobia. There's an idea that it's a deterrent to male-male affection and friendships.
That comes up a lot in the literature and in some of the interviews in the qualitative research that's out there, that there's a concern about being misunderstood. Even in relationships where one's sexual orientation is very present to both parties, there can be a concern that are these statements, are these intimacies being misinterpreted by my friend or socially around me. And I think that ties to some of these hegemonic conceptualizations of masculinity, hegemonic masculinity, which would be more oriented towards a heterosexuality. Heterosexuality is kind of an assumed construct within masculinity, within traditional Western forms of masculinity. And I think that in some ways, as you indicated before, what are some of the harmful aspects, can be another harmful aspect. That then are we inclusive in our conversation about men if homophobia is then a deterrent? But it's, again, not uncommon for both straight and gay men to be concerned about, is this intimacy being misinterpreted by my friend? Or am I misinterpreting this intimacy?
Some of the common themes in the discussion were about lack of social support for men, that it seems that the concerns of women are prioritized, but there aren't too many resources for men.
Very much so. I think, I'm glad you picked up on that element, because I think that that the support around some of men's concerns kind of take a secondary or backseat position to other priorities. And those might be priorities, around qualities of friendship. They also might be priorities around the role of friendship. So, for example, the role that friendship takes in men's lives is oftentimes looks a little different than the role that friendship takes in women's lives. And there's a prioritizing of the role that it takes in women's lives. But for men, it can oftentimes be supportive of a number of wellness factors. So increased health, increased response to healthcare treatment. A 2000 study with cancer patients looking at men's response to healthcare, it showed that the men with more social support, men with more friendships, responded better to treatment. And so is there support for these types of connections, which again promote overall wellness and health?
In the university setting, too, it was mentioned that men tend to stick around longer if they have positive role models, if they have men to identify with on campus.
Very much so. That it's important for whether male or female to have some sort of connection within the first 1 or 2 semesters in higher education, that there's someone on campus who that student feels connected with. And with men in particular, it can be a real challenge as they step into a culture where they don't know someone, and trying to at the same time reach out and be vulnerable and connect with people, while at the same time having to enact masculinity of being independent. So how do you walk into a room full of people, act cool, disinterested, and uninvolved as a good man should, and at the same time try to connect and make friends? It's difficult to balance. So a lot of young men kind of fall between the cracks, especially in higher ed, where we don't necessarily provide those opportunities for men to connect and emphasize that in the same way.
In higher education, there's also a decline of male students in higher education.
Yeah, and I think part of it could be attributed socially to be able to make those connections, but I think that there's a lot of other contributing factors to that, which is concerning. I think is talking about the types of jobs that men might be interested in, how people get paid, and the prizing of that, of being able to get a job where you're making a good amount of money, doesn't necessarily make that connection for a lot of men to see that education is the payoff to get to that point.
All right, very good. Would you tell the audience how they can reach you if they have more questions?
By all means, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to talk about these issues more. I'm at Carlow University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I have an email address. You can actually just look me up. My name is Travis Schermer, S-C-H-E-R-M as in Michael, E-R, and you can look me up on the Carlow website, and please feel free to reach out.
So it's TWSCHERMER at Carlow, CARLOW.edu. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.